Tonight you'll fall asleep inside the forgotten rhythm of life during the Black Death, a time when surviving a single day felt like defying the universe. This isn't a lecture, it's a second-person immersive journey. You won't just learn what happened, you'll breathe the fear, walk the empty streets, and feel how close the end always was. So close your eyes and drift into a world where time moved slower and fate moved fast. You wake up shivering, though the fire's embers still glow. Outside, dawn hasn't quite arrived, but already the air smells wrong. There's something different today, a silence you can't name, a heaviness pressing against your temples. You rub your hands together for warmth, noticing how thin your fingers have become, how sharp your knuckles look in the half-light. It's been months since you last felt full, years since your village knew anything close to peace, and now the coughing has started. You live in a small hamlet outside Florence, although calling it outside feels optimistic. Out there is where bad things fester. Yet even here, between your straw roof and the cow that hasn't mooed in 2 days, the Black Death has arrived. You've heard the whispers, a sickness that moves like smoke and strikes like lightning. It kills without rhyme or reason. It eats families whole. They say it turns skin black, makes your blood boil inside your body. They say it's punishment. They say it's the end. But what is the end to someone who has never truly known a beginning? Your life has always been hard, born into dirt and labor. You learn to bow before both God and Lord. You learn to clean your own wounds with wine, if you were lucky enough to have wine. You learn to accept that pigs sometimes eat children, that winters always steal someone, and that death can wear any face, even that of your mother. Still, this is different. The baker's wife died yesterday. She had been complaining about a boil on her leg. By morning it had burst, and by noon she was bleeding from her eyes. The priest came to pray over her corpse, then collapsed himself. They buried them together behind the chapel, without ceremony. No tolling bell, no holy water, just a frantic digging of earth and a lot of dry heaving from the younger boys. You didn't go, you couldn't. There's only so much horror you can stuff into a human skull before it starts leaking out the ears. Your neighbour, old Matteo, swears it came from the east, from the strange lands where spices grow and people write right to left. He says the merchants brought it, that the Genoese ships carried more than silk and sugar. He says this is what happens when people get too rich, too fast, when they eat foods wrapped in gold and build cathedrals taller than sense. But he also said his goat could talk last spring, so you know, grain of salt. There's no shortage of theories. The town physician, who smells constantly of mould and talks mostly in riddles, thinks the stars are to blame. Mars and Jupiter conspired, he mutters between leechings. You're not sure how 2 glowing dots in the sky could make your sister vomit blood, but you're not exactly in a place to argue. The most common belief, though, is simpler: sin. This is God's fury, plain and steaming. You used to think confession was enough. Now you wonder if it's your very existence that offends him. The city hasn't sent any help. Florence is too busy burying itself to bother with outliers like you. They say carts roll through the streets yelling, "Bring out your dead," and that plague pits overflow so fast the corpses fall in love on the way down. Romantic, in a tragic sort of way. If this is the end of days, it sure picked an artistic flair. Buboes like grapes, blood like wine. Poets would have a field day if they weren't too busy dying. And yet, despite everything, life lurches on. Your younger brother still tries to trap birds, even though most of them have vanished. Your father still curses the skies when the wind blows wrong, and you still wake up before dawn, still listen for the cow, still hope for something that isn't despair in a different hat. There's something deeply stupid, deeply noble about this, about pretending normalcy can exist while death sets up shop next door. Outside, the sun peeks over the hills. A rooster crows half-heartedly. You step out into the morning chill, wrap your shawl tighter, and make your way to the well. You pass 3 houses. 2 are boarded up. One smells like vinegar and rot. you don't ask. As you draw water, a woman approaches a stranger. Her face is wrapped in cloth, her hands gloved. "Don't drink that," she says softly. "It's poisoned." You blink. It's water. She shrugs. So were the wells in Toulon. Then she turns and disappears into the trees. This is your world now. Every day a question mark. Every cough a death sentence. Every stranger a ghost in waiting. You have no science, no vaccine, no idea what's crawling under your skin. You have hope, thin and crumbling, like parchment. But for now, it's enough. You take a sip, and wait. You don't know it yet, but the drink you just took, cool, earthy water drawn from your village's modest well, has an ancient story winding through it, a history older than your name, older even than your village. That water didn't betray you, not this time, but the route that will soon carry the Black Death through every corner of your crumbling world was set long before you ever shivered at dawn. It begins not in Florence, not in Paris, not in London, but thousands of miles east, where the wind smells like dust and ambition, the Eurasian steppe. You wake again, though in truth you've only dozed off for a moment, and everything around you has changed. The flat horizon stretches for miles. Horses whinny nearby. Mongol tents flap in the wind like breathing beasts. You're in a caravan now, and the year is closer to 1340. You're not sure how you got here, but then again, time during pandemics tends to wobble like an old wagon wheel. You don't ask questions, you listen. The merchants around you speak in a dozen languages. Their wagons are stuffed with silks that shimmer like fish scales, bolts of Persian rugs, crates of spices so pungent your nostrils sting just walking past. There's saffron, pepper, cloves, cinnamon, and in one case, something that smells suspiciously like mummified camel. These people have seen the world and stitched it together with commerce. The Mongol Empire, vast and terrifying, has done something peculiar. It made the world smaller, safer roads, united rule, enforced trade agreements with a hint of swordplay. Thanks to the Pax Mongolica, goods can now travel from Beijing to Baghdad, from Samarkand to Sicily. But like any good deal, there's a catch. Rats. Rats, fleas, and something else. Something no one here has a name for yet. It rides in the blood of rodents, waiting quietly inside the guts of flea bellies. It doesn't care for your spices. It doesn't care for your silks. It's not impressed by your knowledge of camel urine's medical properties. All it wants is a warm host and the occasional lymph node. You see the first signs in a merchant's child. Her lips are blue despite the heat, and she cries in a way that doesn't sound human. Soon she goes silent. Then her mother begins coughing black bile. The others say prayers, burn herbs, consult astrological charts. But within days, entire carts are emptied of life. Goods rot in the sun, buzzing with flies that seem almost too eager. You try to leave. You think about slipping away into the dry grasses, letting the steppe swallow you up. But it's too late. You've already heard the stories. Towns abandoned overnight, fields left to rot, monasteries turned into mausoleums. Still, no one stops the caravan. Trade must flow. Gold still gleams. And in a world where bread costs more than life, risk is just a discounted accessory. Eventually, the road takes you west, to the shores of the Black Sea. There's a port city there, Kaffa, where the Genoese run things with a confusing mix of religion, corruption, and excellent cheeses. You sneak in among the traders, watching as crates are loaded onto ships headed for Europe. You see the dead buried just outside the city walls, and you hear the laughter of those still alive, trying too hard to sound normal. And then come the catapults. Yes, really. The Mongols, having decided diplomacy is overrated, begin a siege of the city. But this is no ordinary siege. Instead of flaming arrows or scaling ladders, they start launching corpses, plague victims, swollen, blackened bodies, arcing through the air like grotesque cannonballs. You watch one land in the city square and burst open like a fruit left too long in the sun. People panic, of course. Some weep, others vomit, The clever ones pack up and flee to the ships, thinking the sea will save them. They're wrong. You board one such vessel, let's say it's bound for Constantinople. The journey should take weeks. It takes longer because half the crew is dead before the third sunrise. You watch as sailors, tough men who've survived wars and pirates, collapse in the hold and are wrapped in sailcloth for burial at sea, except the wind's too strong, so the bodies just roll. You hear them thumping in the night. By the time you reach port, you're gaunt and shaking, but you've survived, for now. The city greets you with incense and suspicion. Dock workers look at you sideways. A priest spits holy water in your direction, but it's too late to matter. The rats have disembarked before you even touched land. Fleas jump from rope to robe, and somewhere in the labyrinth of Constantinople, another cough begins. Back in the steppe, people are still dying. The empire that stitched the world together now becomes its unraveling thread. Trade routes carry more than wealth now. They carry whispers, funerals, and a death rate that would make the Grim Reaper ask for time off. Historians still argue whether the plague originated in China, Mongolia, or Central Asia. Some point to ancient DNA found in burial sites near Issyk-Kul, others to records of mass deaths along Silk Road oases. But no one doubts the mechanism. The Black Death wasn't a storm, it was a tide, pulled westward by ships, soldiers, and dreams of profit. And now it's lapping at Europe's toes. You sit on a stone wall overlooking the harbour, watching as crates are unloaded, and the city buzzes with oblivious hope. Behind you, the air is heavy with incense and rot. Ahead, there's only more cities, more ships, more death. You stand, you brush the dust off your cloak. You walk inland. You think maybe if you move fast enough, you'll outrun it. You won't. You're standing inside the fortified walls of Kaffa now, months before it becomes a morbid punchline in military history textbooks. The smell of salt and sweat drifts from the docks, but above it hovers something fouler, decay wrapped in sunshine, the kind of scent that lingers in your clothes, behind your eyes, deep in your memory, even if you live long enough to remember anything. Kaffa, a Genoese trade outpost on the Crimean coast, is many things: a marketplace, a crossroads, a money printer for merchants who've never lifted more than a feather pen. But soon it will be something else entirely, a launch pad for one of the most horrifying deliveries in world history. You arrived with the latest batch of merchants from the Mongol-controlled east, limping into port with half a crew and 100 roomers. You try not to look at the quarantine boats bobbing just offshore, though it's hard to ignore the groans. The city walls are thick, high, and confident, like the people inside who believe bricks can stop a bacterium, which is adorable in a tragic sort of way. Inside, life continues. Barely. The markets still shout, but softer now. The churches burn more incense than ever. Everyone is pretending they haven't noticed that 3 of the city's wealthiest families have already locked themselves in their villas with crates of garlic and cross-shaped pastries. You pass a man selling amulets that promise divine plague protection and wonder if his margins are better than the gravediggers. You also wonder if he actually believes it. He probably does. Desperation makes faith incredibly flexible. And then one afternoon, the siege begins. At first, it's almost comical. You hear the drums before you see the dust. The Mongols, who had once traded with Kaffa, have turned hostile again. It's a familiar rhythm in the region. Handshake, betrayal, attack, treaty, repeat. But this time feels different. The Mongol army surrounds the city with frightening precision. You watch from a watchtower as their tents sprout like mushrooms across the steppe. And then you notice something else. They're coughing. A lot. At first, the defenders laugh. What kind of invading force shows up sick? They'll die before we do, says a nearby guard, who has clearly never seen a plague work its magic. And then come the catapults. It starts with one, a heavy thump in the night, followed by a squelching splash as something lands in the inner courtyard. At first, people think it's just rock or flaming debris, But when dawn arrives, and someone finally pokes the bundle with a stick, they find a corpse, swollen, purple, leaking. Over the next few days, more bodies come flying over the walls. Some smash against buildings, others break apart mid-air. A few land intact, looking for all the world like grotesque sleeping angels. The city erupts into panic. The guards try to burn the corpses. The priests try to bless them. One overachiever tries both. You, being a connoisseur of poor life choices, decide to get closer. There's something obscene about how many people gather to watch, as if the apocalypse, once in motion, becomes performance art. You hear someone say, well, at least they're not launching fire. Someone else replies, yet you all laugh, because not laughing would make you scream. Historians still argue whether this event counts as the world's first example of biological warfare. Some say the Mongols had no idea what they were doing, that the corpse flinging was more psychological than pathological. Others claim it was intentional, tactical, brilliant in a horribly unhygienic way. Either way, the result is the same. Plague seeps into Kaffa like water into cracked stone. Within a week, the symptoms begin. First in the alleys, then the churches, then the merchant homes that swore they were immune. People start leaving food on doorsteps instead of delivering it. Dogs go missing. The rats grow bolder. You consider fleeing. Of course you do. Who wouldn't? But you also know the roads are worse. The sea, though, the sea still offers a way out. So, like many others, you buy passage on a Genoese ship. It's expensive. You trade a ring you stole from a dead priest, and you still have to sweep the decks to cover the difference. You don't care. You'd swab the devil's kneecaps if it got you out of this city. As you prepare to board, you hear screaming near the docks. A family is being turned away. Too many of them are sick. The captain refuses to take them. The father grabs a knife. He's tackled. The children just cry. You don't look back. Once aboard, the ship creaks to life. The sails catch a decent wind. The hull groans with effort, as if it too knows what's coming. You tell yourself you're safe now, that the sea is a barrier, that surely rats can't swim. You are wrong. The journey to Constantinople is rough. Storms slam the deck. The food runs low. Someone gets sick, then someone else. By the time the ship limps into the Golden Horn, you're docking not with goods or stories or hope, but with a sickness that doesn't need a passport. Kaffa fades behind you. Its walls still intact, but its people doomed. Some say the plague burned itself out there. Others claim it was the Genoese who really spread it, those ships, those rats, those starry-eyed merchants, fleeing with death clinging to their cloaks. You step off the gangplank into a city of domes and incense, unaware that you are one of the first silent ambassadors of catastrophe. The people of Constantinople smile politely, offering wine and food and questions. Was it bad? They ask. You nod. Then you cough, and the Black Death begins again. You're standing at the edge of the Golden Horn, blinking in the light of Constantinople, a city so full of relics and relic sellers that even the saints might get lost. Marble towers shimmer in the haze. The smell of cinnamon and stale incense floats from nearby markets. Fishermen argue in Greek, and cats weave between their ankles like gossip. You step off the ship, and for a brief moment you believe you've made it. You've survived Kaffa. You've outrun the Mongols. You've defied the catapulted corpses. Here, surely, you'll be safe. You won't, because plague doesn't knock. It arrives quietly, a tickle in the throat, a touch of dizziness, a strange warmth behind the eyes. The city's so large, so bustling, that your little ship's sickness is swallowed into the noise like a drop in a bucket. But that's how it spreads best. You walk the streets in awe. You marvel at the Hagia Sophia, whispering prayers even if you're not sure which god is in charge here. You eat bread thick with olive oil and pretend it's enough to keep you alive. But the signs are already here. A merchant drops his figs mid-sail. his face pale. A monk collapses during Vespers. In the square, a group of travellers from Egypt argue in hushed tones, while one of them coughs so hard his nose bleeds. And the rats, oh the rats, they're unusually bold, feasting in daylight as if they know they've won. You find a small place to stay, a guest house run by a kind old woman who smells like chamomile and regret. She asks where you came from. You lie. You say Rhodes. She nods, as if that makes it better. It doesn't. Over the next few days, the city changes. Subtly at first, fewer bells from the churches, more smoke from hastily lit fires. Dogs bark longer, cats vanish. You see men in fine robes holding sprigs of rosemary to their noses, muttering prayers, and walking in zigzags as if plague travels in straight lines. By day 10, the screaming starts. Your host dies in her sleep. You find her in the morning, still warm, her eyes open but unseeing. There are no priests to call, no grave diggers available. You wrap her in the only clean sheet and leave her on the doorstep, where someone eventually takes her away without a word. The market's empty. Ships stop docking. A silence blooms, heavy and pungent. You try to leave, of course. You head for the city gates, only to find them closed. The guard, feverish and trembling, tells you no one leaves anymore. The patriarch has ordered prayers, fasts, and total containment. You want to argue, but then he vomits blood onto your shoes. You step back and don't bother wiping it off. In the alleys, children sit beside the bodies of their parents. In the palaces, eunuchs burn herbs and try to keep the air pure. You overhear a scholar blaming the stars, pointing to a conjunction of Mars and Saturn that apparently screams pestilence. You don't know what that means, but it sounds expensive. And then there's the bishop's sermon, his final one. He stands on the steps of Hagia Sophia, voice cracking, robes heavy with sweat. "Repent," he cries. "Repent, for the Lord scourges the world." Behind him, 2 acolytes collapse mid-prayer. One of them begins bleeding from his ears. No one claps. You find a cellar and stay there for 3 days. You don't eat. You barely breathe. At one point, you think you see a shadow in the corner moving, but it's just a rat with a flea circus in tow. You name him Basil. Basil does not leave. On the 4th day, you emerge. The streets look different now. Quieter, yes, but also looser, as if the city's bones are unhinging. You see carts piled high with bodies. Men with scarves over their faces pull them to makeshift pits. The holes are never deep enough. The smell is no longer something you notice. It's just air now. You try to help a woman who's collapsed near the baths. She grabs your wrist, whispers something about her son, then dies. You realize later she's left her handprint on your skin in dried blood. You don't wash it off. There's a rumor spreading that the plague was brought by a cursed scroll, or a demon disguised as a merchant. Another version says it's in the wind, so people start wearing cages on their heads filled with herbs. One man shoves garlic up his nose. You think he's either a genius or incredibly desperate, possibly both. Historians still debate how hard Constantinople was hit. Some claim over half the population perished. Others say the records are too fragmented, too corrupted by fear and politics, to know for sure. What's clear is this: the empire's great jewel became a cracked mirror of itself, reflecting only fear and fire. Eventually, someone opens the gate. You don't ask who, you just walk. You leave behind Basil, the cellar, the endless tolling of distant bells. You walk west toward the Aegean, toward lands you hope are untouched. You pass abandoned villages, burned wagons, and one family living in a tree. You nod to them, they nod back. No one says anything. The world is unraveling, but still you walk, because if death is a tide, maybe walking is your boat. The sea air tastes different here, like wine gone slightly sour. You've made it to the port city of Alexandria. where the ships from Constantinople still arrive, though fewer and fewer each week. You hope to find peace, or at least less plague. But what you find is a city teetering between denial and despair. Alexandria, once the intellectual jewel of the ancient world, now reeks of incense, fish guts, and fear. You can almost hear the ghosts of scholars arguing in the old libraries, debating which god is most likely to strike next. You step off the boat quietly. No one greets you. The harbour is lined with crates that no one is unloading. You see a man sleeping on one, mouth open, but when you get closer, you realize he's not breathing. You don't wake him. Egypt is not immune. The stories spreading inland suggest Cairo is already suffocating. The great city is said to be drowning in corpses, its caliphs and commoners alike, praying for mercy under skies that grow heavier by the hour. Even the muezzins call to prayer with a different tone now, less command, more plea. You make your way into the city and immediately feel the difference. This isn't like Constantinople, where religion hangs thick in the air like perfume. Here, faith is stitched into the bones of buildings. Stone towers rise above the sand like the fingers of gods trying to claw their way back into heaven. You pass mosques where people have begun to sleep in rows, hoping proximity to holiness might spare them. The bazaars, once a kaleidoscope of colour and noise, have dimmed. Many merchants no longer shout. Some simply stare. A fruit vendor offers you dates with shaking hands, muttering something about spoiled figs causing the illness. His stall is pristine. He hasn't sold anything in days. In the southern districts, there are whispers of entire neighborhoods locked behind hastily built walls. The imams advise fasting, prayer, and isolation. Some encourage washing in vinegar. A few call for public acts of piety, self-flagellation, mass repentance, the slaughter of goats on rooftops. You stop asking questions when you see a man carrying a decapitated rooster and crying uncontrollably. You take shelter in a caravanserai, wedged between a dying camel and a man who claims to have seen the angel of death smoking a hookah near the citadel. He offers you a puff. You decline. Each night you dream of Kaffa again, bodies flying, blood hissing on stone. You wake with a scream caught in your throat. One morning your left eye twitches uncontrollably. You spend the next 2 hours convinced it's the plague, it's just dust. This time, you hear rumors that the Nile is no longer safe to drink from, that people are catching the sickness just by standing downwind of infected boats, that the rats are now immune, that cats are working with demons, that the dead are whispering names. The best rumor is that the Sultan has locked himself in a marble chamber with 30 virgins and enough lemon water to survive until the end of time. You doubt the details, but you respect the effort. Historians still dispute the path of the plague through North Africa. Some records say it travelled from Alexandria to Tunis, then to Morocco. Others argue that it entered via infected ships from Genoa or Marseille. The chaos makes certainty slippery. But one thing is clear, the Mediterranean, once a sea of connection, has become a swirling cauldron of contagion. You try to flee again, this time boarding a small vessel headed for the island of Crete. The captain is nervous. He keeps a bucket of herbs by his feet and mutters prayers between sips of sour wine. You sleep on the deck, wrapped in old sailcloth, listening to the waves like they're whispering secrets. One night you hear someone sobbing near the stern. You don't investigate. Crete is no better, quieter perhaps, but the fear is the same. You stay only long enough to trade a piece of silver for a few days' food, then find passage to Sicily, a place you once heard about in stories of poets and oranges, where the sun makes everything golden. It does not shine like that anymore. You land in Messina, and the port greets you, not with music, but with silence. The bells have stopped. The docks are lined with ships that will never sail again. Their crews are gone, or worse, still aboard, groaning in the heat. You see one man tied to the mast. You don't want to know why. Sicily is where the screams truly begin. This is no longer the creeping dread of eastern ports. This is the full arrival. You walk through markets turned morgues, down alleys thick with flies, past courtyards where children play funerals because they've forgotten how to play anything else. Here, no one believes in containment. The plague is not outside. It is in the breath, the bread, the very walls. You see a woman stab her husband for coughing too loud. You don't stop her. No one does. You stay in an abandoned church for 3 nights, sleeping beside a statue of the Virgin Mary, whose eyes look suspiciously red. On the 4th night, you hear footsteps and hide. A group of men enters, dragging something. When they leave, there's a new bundle at the altar. You do not look inside. Sicily is dying, but death here has rhythm. The cries rise and fall like a chorus. The fires blaze and then sputter. The rats squeak in unison. It feels like the whole island is rehearsing its own funeral, again and again, hoping that this time it will be perfect. You leave as fast as you can, hopping onto a fishing boat, heading north. The fisherman says nothing, just rows. His wife is already dead, he tells you once, without looking up. You nod. As the coastline fades, you look back one last time. The fires are still burning, the screams have not stopped, and somewhere deep inside you, a tiny voice says, Europe hasn't even begun to suffer yet. You drift for days across the Mediterranean, the sky vast and unforgiving above you. At night the stars mock you with their indifferent twinkle. You wonder if they've always been this smug, or if the plague has simply made you more poetic. The fisherman says little. He rows, he spits, he rows again. You've grown to admire his dedication to both motion and silence. His only companion now is a sack of stale bread and a dagger tied with string. You're not sure which one keeps him going. Eventually, the shoreline of Greece appears, but the fisherman won't land. He points instead toward a ship bobbing in a nearby cove. Them, he says, they know the way. And with that, he turns his back to you, literally and spiritually, and rows off into the dusk, leaving you adrift with nothing but a dull ache in your limbs, and a sense that your personal hygiene may now qualify as criminal. The ship is small, half-rotted, but it's manned, barely. 2 sailors pull you aboard without a word. One of them has a bandage over his eye. The other looks at you like he's trying to remember whether you owe him money or blood. They offer you a crust of cheese and something that might be wine or floor cleaner. You drink it anyway. They're headed south, they say. Egypt again. Then to Cyprus. Then maybe Jerusalem, if there's anything left of it. You ask why they're not heading west, to safer shores. The one-eyed sailor laughs so hard he almost falls overboard. There is no west, he says, not anymore. You end up on Cyprus instead. It's supposed to be a stopover, a place to take on food and water, but nothing is ever that simple now. As you approach the island, you can already smell it, not the sea, not the fish or the salt or the resin from nearby pine trees, but the smell of rot, human rot, death left out too long under a cruel sun. The port is in chaos. Men scream at each other in Italian, Greek, Arabic, and desperation. The dockmaster is dead, they say. The mayor is missing. A priest has nailed a curse to the city gates. Let God sort the guilty, it reads. Beneath it, someone has scrawled, too late. You disembark, though you're not sure why. The ship is no sanctuary, but neither is land. A woman collapses beside you before you've even taken 10 steps. People step over her like she's luggage. You find a corner of the port market to huddle in, behind a stack of mouldy oranges. A cat curls beside you, uninterested in plague, politics, or panic. Cyprus is a war zone without soldiers. The infection has reached inland, far beyond the ports. Monasteries are closed, temples abandoned. Farmers have stopped harvesting. Some burn their fields instead. So the plague can't eat, they explain. Like that makes perfect sense. You meet a group of merchants hiding in the ruins of a Roman bathhouse. They believe bathing is what brought the sickness. Clean bodies attract demons, one tells you solemnly. You stare at your own dirt-caked skin and wonder what that says about your odds. At night, the city glows from bonfires meant to purify the air. They don't. If anything, the smoke thickens the rot. A local apothecary sells crushed amethyst as a cure. You see a man drink goat's blood mixed with vinegar. You think about trying it, but then remember you're still technically trying to live. A rumor spreads that a ship from Genoa has docked on the other side of the island, and that its crew brought not just the plague, but the plague's ghost. No one knows what that means. It doesn't matter. People are scared of everything now. Shadows, coughs, long silences. One man stabs his own wife because she touched a dead chicken. Another woman throws her infant into the sea to cleanse it. You think about leaving. You always think about leaving. But the boats are fewer now, and those that remain demand outrageous prices. One sailor wants your teeth, just the front ones. Another wants a story he's never heard before. You consider offering both. Instead, you stay. And so you begin to wander. The island is beautiful in the way haunted places often are. Vivid, sun-washed, aching with contrast. Olive groves stretch into the hills. Bees still buzz. But the people move like ghosts already. The dead are burned in mass pyres. The living avoid each other like mirrors. You pass by a boy who hasn't spoken in 3 days. He just holds a stick with a rag tied to it, pretending it's a flag. You find temporary shelter in an old crusader fortress, now occupied by a cult of herbalists who insist nettle tea and chanting in reverse will ward off death. You go along with it. Honestly, chanting is less exhausting than screaming. Historians still debate whether Cyprus was hit before or after Constantinople. Some records suggest simultaneous outbreaks. Others imply staggered waves. But all agree on one thing. The island was devastated. Entire villages gone. Clergy and criminals buried in the same pits. The rich couldn't bribe their way out, and the poor had nothing left to offer. Plague does not care how many sheep you own. Eventually, you leave the fortress. The chants have become unsettling, and one of the herbalists tried to marry a statue. You make your way back to the coast, hoping to find passage anywhere else. You meet a fisherman who claims he's sailing to Egypt again. It's better now, he says. The dead are mostly gone. You ask if that means the plague is over. He shrugs. Or just everyone died. He laughs. You board the boat anyway. As the shoreline of Cyprus shrinks behind you, you realize something. Each place you fled has followed you, not just in the literal sense, rats, fleas, germs, but in the weight they leave in your chest. Every scream, every prayer, every laugh that turned into a cough. You look down at your hands, still steady, no boils, not yet. The fisherman begins to hum. You hum with him. Because at this point, what else can you do? You arrive in Sicily, not with a shout, but with a murmur, just another face among the frightened, salt-crusted masses disembarking in Messina. It's supposed to be the jewel of the Mediterranean, a land of poets, orange groves and sun-kissed serenity. Instead, you're welcomed by silence, thick enough to bruise. The port is wrong. Ships float with no crew. Sails torn like half-remembered prayers. Dock workers are gone. No shouting, no singing, no clatter of crates, just the gulls. Louder now that they're dining well. The air tastes coppery. The rats, bold as nobility, walk with the arrogance of creatures who know they've won. You count 5 before stepping off the boat. One stops to look at you, tilts its head like it recognizes you. You walk faster. Messina, the city they say was the gateway, now looks like a mouth full of broken teeth. Doors hang open. Laundry still flutters from windows above bodies that no longer move. A dog trots past you with a human finger in its mouth. No one chases it. You don't know it yet, but you've stepped into the first full-blown European horror show. The show where the curtain never closes. The actors all die mid-performance, and the audience is too terrified to clap. It started simply enough. A few Genoese ships returned here, fleeing from plague-ridden ports in the east, hoping Sicily would offer refuge. They were allowed to dock briefly, long enough for rats to scatter, for fleas to hop, for the invisible to set up shop in the lungs and lymph nodes of everyone from fishmongers to friars. Then the real show began. At first they called it the corruption. People grew pale, developed fevers, and began to speak nonsense. Then came the swellings, those infamous buboes that blossomed in armpits and groins like obscene fruit. They turned black, split open, and leaked a stench that made incense cry. Death followed within days, sometimes hours. Now the city simmers in its own panic stew. No one trusts anyone. If you cough, they run. If you sweat, they pray. If you so much as sniffle, someone might stab you. You hide your symptoms. You have none, but you hide them anyway, just in case someone decides you do. You keep your eyes down, your pace steady, your hands close. Every interaction feels like a negotiation with fate. In the city square, a friar shouts sermons from the top of a statue. He claims this as divine judgment, that the whores, the gamblers, the cheese tax evaders, all of them have brought this upon themselves. You wonder what kind of God hates dairy. You keep walking. You meet a woman selling holy talismans, wooden figures dipped in garlic and goat milk. They keep death away, she says with a wild grin. Her husband lies dead at her feet, one arm still twitching. You do not buy one. You stay in an abandoned house, near the outskirts. It's quiet, mouldy, and mostly intact. The walls are painted with faded flowers. You wonder who lived here before. You hope they left. You doubt it. Each day, the city empties further. Families vanish overnight. Entire streets become cemeteries. The plague doctors begin to appear now, grotesque figures with beaked masks and long black robes. They look like birds who forgot how to fly. Their masks are stuffed with herbs meant to purify the air. They look ridiculous. They look terrifying. You see one doctor press a red-hot poker to a man's bubo. The scream echoes through the alley like a trumpet blast in hell's orchestra. The man dies anyway. The doctor doesn't flinch. Historians agree that Messina was one of the earliest and worst hit cities in Europe. The plague didn't just visit. It moved in, changed the locks, and started redecorating with skulls. Some say over half the population died in weeks. Others argue it was closer to 2/3. What's certain is that Sicily never stood a chance. Its position as a trading hub became a death sentence. Wealth became poison. Ships, the veins of commerce, turned into syringes of doom. One night, you walk to the sea. The moon is out, full and indifferent. You see fires on the horizon, villages, maybe, or just someone trying to burn away the smell of rot. You sit in the sand and cry for the first time in months. It feels stupid. It feels necessary. You think about the people you've lost, most of whom you barely knew, fellow travellers, merchants, a sailor who gave you half a pear once and died the next day. You remember a little girl in Cyprus who offered you a flower. You hope she lived. You doubt it. In the morning, you decide to leave. You find a horse, half-starved but alive, tied outside a church. You take it. You apologize to whoever owned it. You leave a handful of coins in a cracked bowl by the altar. You whisper a prayer, even though you're not sure who's listening. You ride inland, hoping that the hills are cleaner, that the plague hasn't yet climbed this high, that maybe, just maybe, the villagers in the valleys are still singing. You find one. It's quiet. Too quiet. You ride through, calling out. No one answers. You pass a bakery. The bread is still on the counter, rock hard but untouched. A cat licks itself on the windowsill, unconcerned. In the square, a single man sits beside a fountain. He's humming. You approach. His eyes are vacant, his hands clasped, like he's holding something invisible. He whispers, "They all went to the sea." You ask, "Who?" He smiles. All of them. You don't stay. You ride on. Because this island, this cursed jewel, is no longer a place for the living. It's a museum of grief, a theatre of echoes, a chapel where even God has stopped attending Mass. And Europe is just beginning to unravel. You ride north now, leaving the hushed valleys of Sicily behind, like fading verses of a funeral hymn. The sea grows smaller in your peripheral vision, replaced by rolling hills and gnarled olive trees that sway like old men arguing with the wind. Your horse, whom you've named Maybe, snorts with exhaustion, but presses on. You're heading toward Rome, the eternal city, as if any place could be eternal in this world of sudden endings. The roads are oddly empty, too empty. It's as if everyone else had the same idea, but a head start. Here and there you see evidence of flight overturned carts, abandoned shoes, a doll face down in the mud. You pass a man muttering to himself, swinging a censer wildly as if to beat the plague into submission with frankincense. You nod in greeting. He doesn't notice, or maybe he does, but prefers ghosts to strangers now. When you finally see Rome's walls on the horizon, they seem less imposing than you imagined. You thought they'd feel like the gates of heaven or hell, depending on your spiritual status. Instead, they just look tired, like old bones, pretending to stand tall. You approach cautiously. There's no line of pilgrims, no chatter of merchants, no beggars reciting prayers for coins. At the main gate, 2 guards stand half-slumped. One is asleep. The other chews something suspiciously green and glances at you like a man, deciding whether conversation is worth the calories. You ask if you can enter. He shrugs. Plague's inside. But so is everything else. He doesn't say what everything means. You go in anyway. Rome is a city of contradictions. Marble and mud, saints and sewage, gold crosses above alleys that smell like last week's regrets. Even without the plague, it always felt a little cursed. Now, it's just honest about it. At first glance, the city appears intact. The buildings still stand. The fountains still trickle. But the people are hiding. You pass rows of shuttered windows, doors nailed shut, sheets with crosses painted in lamb's blood. Occasionally you hear whispers, prayers, arguments, children asking questions no one can answer. In the forum, someone has painted "Non c'è salvezza" across a wall in red. There is no salvation. Below it someone else has scrawled "Ma c'è vino," but there is wine. You find that deeply comforting. The churches are still open, technically. You enter one, Santa Maria in Trastevere. The incense hits you like a memory you didn't know you had. It burns sweet and thick, trying desperately to mask the odor of fear. A priest stands at the altar, arms raised, eyes closed. He's been holding the same pose for at least 10 minutes. You wait. Eventually he lowers them and begins to sob. You leave a coin in the collection box. You're not sure why. Habit, maybe. Guilt, possibly. Hope, foolishly. The Vatican is quieter than you expected. The Swiss guards still stand at attention, their uniforms absurd against the backdrop of apocalyptic despair. You overhear a cardinal arguing with someone about quarantining the papal apartments. Another insists that relics must be bathed in vinegar. A third suggests that prayer alone can purify the air. You've heard all of this before, just in different languages. Historians still debate how severely Rome itself was struck. Some suggest the city's relative isolation and its fortress-like religious institutions gave it slight advantages. Others point to widespread clerical death and the breakdown of basic sacraments. What's certain is that even the holiest of cities couldn't hold back something that didn't believe in holiness. The Pope, they say, has fled to Avignon. Sensible, you think. Rome might be sacred ground, but it's also a very good place to get trampled by theology and typhus at the same time. Some still hold Mass, but fewer show up. The dead, after all, don't need communion. You walk to the Tiber, hoping the water will give you clarity, or at least wash your hands. It does neither. It smells like fish and secrets. You see children throwing rocks into the river. One turns to you and asks, "Do the dead float if they're full of sin?" You don't know how to answer. You say, "Only if they didn't pay their taxes." He nods solemnly, then goes back to throwing. At night, the city turns into a symphony of wails and murmurs. You hear coughing from every direction. Doors slam, dogs bark. Somewhere nearby, someone plays a lute with such tenderness that you begin to cry. You don't know who it is or why they're playing, but it makes you feel almost human again. You sleep under the arches of the Colosseum. It's poetic, in a ha-ha, everything's dead sort of way. You dream of gladiators fighting rats, of emperors issuing decrees to clouds, of saints vomiting lilies. You wake to the sound of footsteps. A man in fine robes passes by, dragging a sack. He glances at you, then looks away. You hear coins jingling in his pockets and bones rattling in the bag. Rome is collapsing, not with fire, but with silence, the kind that sneaks into your lungs and stays there. You leave in the early morning, before the city fully stirs. You don't say goodbye. Rome doesn't notice you came. As you cross the bridge out of the city, you see a pigeon pecking at something shiny. You think of saints and relics, and all the things that couldn't save you. And then you walk on, because the plague has more cities to visit, and you're still its favourite passenger. The road to Avignon cuts through fields that once promised bounty, now whispering warnings with every blade of brittle grass. You ride through ghost towns that seem more memory than matter, windows like empty eyes, wells choked with silence. Maybe your horse continues without complaint. She has grown used to the smell of decay. You have too. You're chasing a rumour that the Pope himself, that beacon of earthly and celestial authority, has fled here to escape the rot of Rome. Avignon, safe, walled, blessed, that's the story. And you, foolishly but predictably, are following the scent of hope like a dog after a sausage. As you approach the Rhone River, you notice the skies change. Less sun, more mist. The land flattens, the trees grow wary. You pass a group of monks whipping themselves with ropes, crying out in Latin. Their backs are raw, their eyes empty. One of them smiles at you and says, "We must hurt the body to save the soul." You nod, like you agree, then ride faster. You arrive in Avignon at dusk, the sky the colour of bruised grapes. The city walls loom large, clean, and suspiciously well guarded. A line of would-be pilgrims and desperate merchants stretches from the gate down to the riverbank. Most are turned away. Some are let in, but only after being doused in vinegar and questioned like suspected heretics. When your turn comes, a young guard with patchy facial hair and eyes too tired for his age asks where you've come from. You lie. He lets you in. Inside, Avignon does feel different, almost smugly so. The streets are cleaner, the markets quieter, and the presence of holy men practically leaks from the stone. Cardinals walk like they're immune. The smell of sanctified beeswax lingers around doorways. You even see a troupe of musicians playing in a square, which feels wildly inappropriate and yet strangely comforting. You rent a room in a boarding house that smells faintly of lavender and confession. Your hostess tells you the Pope is indeed here, residing in the papal palace, fortified, guarded, blessed. He has 2 physicians, she adds proudly, and a fireplace that never stops burning. You blink. To stay warm? No, she says, to keep the air moving. And there it is. They believe, like many do now, that still air carries death, that breezes are holy, and that movement equals life. You nod again, silently filing it away next to leeches as therapy and onions as plague detectors. You visit the papal palace, or at least the exterior. It's massive, imposing, and deeply uninterested in your existence. The guards don't let you in, but you join the crowd that gathers each afternoon to watch the Pope wave from a balcony. He appears for 2 minutes, flanked by robed advisors and enormous candles, looking every bit the reluctant celebrity. People cheer, You do not. He looks more scared than saintly. The city is, for now, functional. The couriers still ride, the markets still open, priests still offer mass, though communion is now administered with tongs. Some say Avignon is protected by God. Others whisper about bribes, secrets, or a magical artifact buried beneath the cathedral. One man tells you he saw a rat drown in holy water. It burst into flames, he insists. You smile politely and back away. But Avignon is not immune. Not really. It begins in the slums, as these things always do. A tanner falls ill, then his neighbour, then the baker who shared bread with both. The rich pretend not to notice until their cooks start dying, then their wives, then their sons. The Pope's guards begin refusing entry to the sick, then they start burning clothes in the streets. A man with a boil is dragged away from a fountain, screaming. Another collapses on the cathedral steps. They scrub the stone for hours. The music stops. People start whispering again, not about God, but about escape. You volunteer with a group digging graves, not out of nobility, out of practicality. They offer food and a place to sleep. You take both. The work is horrific, mechanical, and strangely meditative. Each body feels lighter than the last, as if the soul doesn't even bother lingering anymore. The graveyard expands daily. You stop learning names. One evening, a friar gives you a sprig of rosemary. Keep it close, he says. It confuses the devil. You tuck it into your shirt. It doesn't work, but it smells nice. You hear the Pope has ordered bonfires around his chambers, that he only sees visitors through veils, and that he has his meals boiled twice before eating. Some call it caution, others call it cowardice. You just call it survival. Historians debate how much Avignon truly suffered. Records were edited, rewritten, or lost entirely. But even the papal seat could not avoid the creeping reach of Yersinia Pestis. The idea that holiness could shield you died here, quietly, behind limestone walls. One night you stand by the Rhone, watching the river swallow the moonlight. A woman beside you, wrapped in rags, hums a lullaby. She tells you she used to be a midwife. Now I deliver people to the other side, she says with a tired smile. You ask her if she's afraid. She shrugs. I've seen worse than death. You believe her. You stay in Avignon until the fires go out, until the Pope disappears from the balcony, until the music is replaced with weeping. Then you leave. Not because it's time, but because you feel yourself changing. The plague doesn't just consume the body, it eats the voice, the hope, the part of you that used to say, maybe tomorrow. So you ride north, through lavender fields, now stiff with frost, and you carry the rosemary with you, because even false comfort is still comfort. You ride out of Avignon, wrapped in a new kind of silence, the kind that settles in the bones, not the ears. The road ahead winds through the sun-stained countryside of Provence, past vineyards abandoned mid-harvest and olive groves, where the wind sounds suspiciously like whispering. Maybe your horse, now noticeably skinnier, but just as grimly committed as you, seems to understand the hush. She trots gently, as if afraid to wake the land itself. You pass through a hamlet called Aigues Mortes, though you see neither water nor life. The village sign creaks overhead, swaying with every breath of wind. You call out once, then regret it. A head peeks from an upper window, pale, gaunt, too frightened to speak. You wave, the head disappears. You ride on. Your next goal is Paris, because of course it is. Every journey has to escalate. If Avignon was the heart of spiritual Europe, then Paris is the brain, or at least the overconfident teenage version of a brain. It's where scholars debate the colour of angels, and whether lice count as original sin. It's where royalty dresses in brocade, while peasants smear pig fat on their boots. If the plague has reached Paris, then surely nothing sacred or smart is safe. You camp just outside the city's reach, near a crumbled stone bridge. There's a fire already burning when you arrive, and a woman tending it. She's old enough to look timeless and smiles without teeth. You sit in silence for a while, then she speaks. It's already there, you know. You nod. You assumed as much. They say the Seine's gone black. You raise an eyebrow. Not the water, the air. The next morning you see it for yourself. The city looms across the river, veiled in a grey haze that clings to the spires like a desperate lover. You cross into Paris over the Pont Neuf, which feels newer than usual because half its surface has been recently scrubbed, likely in a futile effort to remove both filth and fear. Paris is alive, in the way that a beehive in a forest fire is alive. People bustle, shout, argue, but all of it carries an undertone of doom. Markets are open, but only for dry goods. Meat is suspect, fish are blamed, bread is worshipped, cheese is somewhere in between, depending on its smell. You find shelter in a scribe's workshop in the Latin Quarter. The owner fled, but left the key under a stone. Scribes are romantic that way. Inside, the air is musty with ink and old parchment. You read a few half-finished sermons, then use the rest as kindling. Paris is unravelling with exquisite French flair. The university debates whether the stars are to blame. Some scholars argue that Mars has aligned with Saturn in a celestial act of betrayal. Others blame bad air, miasma they call it, a word that feels like a perfume gone rancid. The king is gone, of course. The royal court has scattered like dandelion fluff in the wind. Nobles retreat to their country estates, hoping that distance can purchase safety. But as you've learnt, the plague respects neither wealth nor geography. It travels by rat, flea, and rumour. In the streets, the people try everything. They burn barrels of rosemary and lavender, hoping sweet smoke will chase death away. They beat drums, light candles, chant in alleys. Some parade through the streets in white robes, whipping themselves raw, believing their suffering will appease an angry God. You see one man flogging himself while reciting the Lord's Prayer backward. He collapses. No one helps him. The churches are overflowing, not with faith, but with fear. Confessions spill out in waves. Priests weep as they offer last rites faster than their Latin can handle. You stand in the back of Notre Dame, watching a bishop anoint a woman with oil, while the child in her arms dies mid-sentence. The bishop doesn't blink. He simply moves on to the next. The city begins to smell like memory. Rot clings to your clothes. Perfume becomes an act of war. You buy a pomander from a man near the Seine. He claims it contains ambergris, rose petals, and holy shavings from a saint's tooth. You wear it around your neck like a talisman. It helps, or at least it delays questions. One afternoon, you wander into the Sorbonne. The lecture halls are mostly empty, but you find a philosopher in one corner, arguing with himself. He's mapped the spread of the plague on the wall, using soot and wine. You study it. He tells you the rats are a distraction. The true vector is sin, he whispers, especially lust. You leave before he asks for a demonstration. Historians still argue about Paris. Some say the plague killed a third of the population. Others say it was half. Some claim the city rebounded quickly, its intellectual core resilient. Others insist that the trauma rewired its soul. What's agreed upon is this: the plague revealed the soft underbelly of civilization, the polite agreements, the illusions of control, the idea that intelligence could insulate you from mortality. You spend your nights on the roof of the scribe's shop, watching smoke rise from the poorer quarters. Sometimes you see flashes of light, funeral fires, perhaps, or the flicker of final prayers. One night a child climbs onto the roof beside you. He doesn't speak. He just hands you a piece of bread and sits. You eat in silence. Then he leaves. You never see him again. Eventually even Paris grows too heavy. The smoke, the screams, the scent of disinfected hopelessness, it all presses against your chest until you can't breathe. You pack your things. You say goodbye to the scribe's shop. to the philosopher, to the rooftops that briefly felt like freedom. You cross the Pont Neuf again, heading west this time, toward the countryside, toward the edge of the known. You don't look back. You've learnt your lesson. The plague doesn't need to chase you. It's already where you're going. The French countryside stretches before you like a painting abandoned mid-stroke, fields of grain that no one will harvest, paths worn by feet that no longer tread them, cottages where silence has grown vines thicker than ivy. You ride slowly now, not because of fatigue, though it weighs on you, but because there's no longer a reason to hurry. Plague has caught up to you, and you've stopped pretending you can outrun it. Maybe carries on with that stoic nobility only animals possess, stepping over fallen signposts and the occasional broken cart. You pass through villages where doors are open, meals still cooling on tables, chairs knocked over as if their owners simply evaporated. Sometimes you whisper hello, even though no one answers. You do it for the ghosts, or maybe for yourself. You stop at a place called Montreuil. It's the kind of village that usually appears in poems. Low houses, cobbled streets, a church at the centre with a bell that rings whenever a child is born or dies. Now it's stuck in between. The bell hangs silent. You tie, maybe to a tree, and explore. There are signs of life, but only just. A candle burns in one window. A rooster crows in the distance, sounding deeply confused. You find a baker's shop with fresh loaves, lined up as if waiting for someone polite enough to pay. You take one, you leave a coin, then because it feels wrong otherwise, you straighten the fallen stool outside the door. Further in, you find a woman sweeping her doorstep. She's old, or plague-aged. Her hands tremble, but her spine is straight. You greet her. She squints at you, then nods. "Still clean here," she says, "but not for long." You ask why she stays. "Where would I go?" she replies. "And who would sweep this step?" There's no good answer. You stay a night in Montreuil. The air is almost sweet here, and the stars still feel honest. The villagers gather quietly in the square at dusk. They don't sing or pray, just sit, as if waiting for a storm they already know is coming. You continue west the next day, past more hamlets, more stories told in abandoned belongings. A child's doll nestled in the roots of a tree, a pair of boots lined neatly by a riverbank, a cart filled with books, and a note that reads, "Take one if you can still read." You take a copy of La Chanson de Roland. It's stained but readable. You find yourself reciting lines under your breath, just to remember what language feels like when it's not afraid. Eventually you reach the Loire Valley, once a place of wine, laughter, and far too complex inheritance disputes. Now it's quieter than a nun at a funeral. You pass vineyards wild with overgrowth, as if the grapes have declared independence. The castles are closed, literally and spiritually. Nobles hide behind their gates, trusting in thick stone and well-paid guards. But stone doesn't stop fleas, and money doesn't bribe bacteria. You meet a man outside Chinon, who offers you wine. You accept. He insists it's the only safe drink left. You suspect he just doesn't want to die sober. He tells you he used to be a minstrel. Now he digs graves. More reliable work, he says, then laughs so hard he spits wine on your tunic. You don't mind. Together you bury a family of 4. No one else showed up. He plays a soft tune on a cracked lute afterward. You stay the night in his barn, where mice tiptoe politely around your feet. Historians often romanticize the French countryside during this era, speaking of rustic resilience and peasant wisdom. But the truth is more brittle. Rural areas were hit hard, not because they were crowded, but because they were forgotten. Doctors didn't travel this far. Priests were scarce. News arrived too late to matter. The plague was no longer a mystery by the time it arrived. It was a verdict. You move on deeper into Brittany, where the air smells like brine and salt cod. Here the villagers still speak Breton, a language that sounds like a riddle spoken underwater. They look at you with a mix of suspicion and pity. like someone who's already been marked. You try to explain you're just passing through. No one invites you to stay. One evening, as you approach the coast, you see something extraordinary. A wedding. It's small, hastily arranged, and wildly inappropriate by most standards. The bride wears a dress that's clearly a tablecloth. The groom has a fever, but they smile genuinely. You stop to watch from a distance. An old priest mutters the words. Two villagers sing something resembling a hymn, and when they kiss, it's not with fear, but defiance. Afterward, the bride notices you. She waves you over. You hesitate. She insists. They offer you a crust of bread and some dried apples. You ask why they'd waste a good wedding in a time like this. We're all dying, she says. Might as well do it wearing flowers. You sleep that night in a hayloft above the celebration, the scent of lavender and cider lingering in the air. You think about love, not just romantic, but human, the kind that keeps people from locking their doors, even when death knocks, the kind that buries strangers, the kind that offers wine and song, even when both are in short supply. In the morning, you're gone before they wake. You write their names in the margin of your stolen book. You hope they get a chapter longer than most, because soon, very soon, the plague will cross the Channel. And England, proud, muddy, gloriously self-important England, isn't ready. The Channel looks deceptively peaceful as you stand at the edge of the continent, watching England drift into view like a cloud too proud to rain. Maybe shifts beneath you, snorting at the salt in the air. You wonder if she senses it too, that quiet tension that comes just before everything breaks. England lies ahead, smug and green, full of sheep and sermons, pretending it hasn't heard the screaming. The crossing is short but grim. You board a fishing vessel bound for Dorset, captained by a man who claims his boat is blessed by St. Brendan himself. He drinks from a wooden flask and mutters prayers between burps. No rat stays on this boat, he says, and you almost believe him until you see one dart beneath the rope coils. You say nothing. Faith, after all, is a fragile thing. The waves slap the hull like angry palms. A gull follows you, squawking with what sounds like sarcastic glee. The captain calls it omen. You call it Kevin. Kevin seems to be enjoying the apocalypse. Land comes into view, a sloping coast, green with summer, dotted with cottages that look like they've been carefully placed by someone trying very hard to be quaint. You dock at Melcombe Regis, a harbour town with a proud maritime tradition, and, very soon, the dubious honour of being the plague's first English landing site. You step onto English soil and immediately feel the difference. The air is cooler, but the looks are warmer, or perhaps just nosier. The English have a way of being suspicious and polite at the same time, like they're interviewing you for a crime you haven't committed yet. A local merchant offers you a meat pie. You decline. He looks offended. Melcombe Regis bustles, sort of. The port is alive with activity, but undercut by nerves. The ships unload quickly. Sailors are questioned, their wares inspected, their temperatures checked with gloved hands and long stares. The town official with a big hat, and even bigger nose, patrols the docks with vinegar-soaked cloths tied around his wrists. You ask where you can sleep. He eyes you. You look clean, he says, for now. You find a room in a tavern called the Leper's Flagon, which feels like a cruel joke or an intentional dare. The innkeeper, a woman named Editheth, is cheerful in the way people become when they've stopped expecting good news. She gives you a room for half price, in case you don't make it a week. The rumours arrive before the symptoms. They always do. A sailor's son dies in his sleep. A washerwoman collapses mid-laundry. A priest delivers a sermon and vomits blood before the final Amen. The town's response is immediate denial, then prayer, then a very British resignation. Tea is brewed, bread is baked, curtains are drawn, and then it begins in earnest. The deaths are fast, dramatic. Children die in their mother's arms. Husbands fall beside their wives. Dogs bark over corpses that no one comes to claim. The church tolls its bell until the bell ringer himself drops dead at the rope. By then, everyone knows. You flee inland, because England, for all its hedges and hedgehogs, is no safer than the continent. The plague spreads like rumour, and rumour here moves faster than fire. You stop briefly in Dorchester, where a man insists the disease can be avoided by drinking cider laced with crushed daisies. He dies mid-demonstration. The countryside rolls before you, golden and green, as if nothing has changed, but every village tells the same story. A house boarded up, a field unharvested, children too quiet. The word moraine is whispered in corners, a catch-all term for any animal disease now turned toward humans. The air's gone sour, one man says. It's the breath of hell. You reach Salisbury and find it humming with denial. The cathedral still holds mass, though communion is now served with sticks, and everyone stands 2 arm lengths apart. The bishop has taken to dousing himself in rosewater daily, convinced it forms an invisible shield. He smells wonderful. He also looks like death. A group of flagellants arrives, singing dirges and bleeding onto the cobblestones. They're refused entry, so they camp outside the gates, whipping themselves and shouting until they're hoarse. You join them for a night, not to whip yourself, but to listen. One man tells you the world will end in 6 months. Another insists it already has. The third just misses his wife. You offer him your last apple. He cries. Historians say the Black Death reached England in June 1348. From Melcombe Regis, it spread east and north, like ink on wet parchment. London would soon follow, but in these early days, the sense of maybe still lingers. Maybe it'll stop. Maybe it's just the coast. Maybe if we pray hard enough, boil enough herbs, bleed enough sinners. Maybe. You know better. You stay one night in Winchester, long enough to see the bishop order mass graves dug outside the city. The gravediggers drink before they dig. One sings nursery rhymes under his breath. Ring-a-ring-o roses, he hums, and you feel the air stiffen. You wonder if the rhyme means something yet, or if meaning will come later, like it always does with tragedy. London waits ahead, like a hungry thing. But before you face it, you detour through the Weald, the forested heart of southern England. You sleep beneath trees that have stood since before the Romans came. You talk to owls. You talk to yourself. You wonder if anyone in the capital still laughs. One morning, you find a village nestled in a hollow. No one stops you. No one notices. You walk among homes filled with silence. A doll sits in a window. A fire has burned itself out, leaving only blackened pots and soot-scrawled walls. The church door swings on its hinge. You enter. You kneel. You do not pray. You just breathe. Then you rise and move on, because London is calling, and London always answers. London greets you like an old friend who owes you money, loud, crowded, vaguely hostile, and pretending not to be sick. From the moment you ride in through Aldgate, the contradictions pile up like firewood. The city hums with its usual ambition, but now it's underscored by an anxious twitch in every step, every cough, every side-eye glance that lingers a beat too long. You tighten your cloak around your nose. It doesn't help. The streets are lined with barrels of vinegar, sprigs of rosemary dangling like wind chimes from every threshold. To purify the air, says a woman selling scented wax tablets near the gate. She offers you one shaped like a lion. You decline, but she slips it into your pocket anyway. You'll need it before long. You cross through Bishopsgate, past butcher shops still bravely open. Meat hangs on rusty hooks, glistening with fly-specked defiance. A boy waves a pig's foot in your direction and shouts, "Guaranteed plague-free." He laughs so hard he nearly chokes. His father smacks him on the back, and for a moment it almost feels like the old London, a city that could always laugh, even when drowning. But the smell tells the truth. Under the scent of wax, piss, and roasted chestnuts, there's that other smell, the sweet, sickly reek of flesh going wrong. You catch it in alleyways, behind doorways, cracked open for a second too long. London is rotting, but it refuses to lie down. You find lodging in Southwark, just across the river, where the inns are cheaper and the rules looser. Your room smells like wet straw and ambition. The innkeeper, a man named Wilmot, with a beard that could hide secrets, tells you the pestilence hasn't crossed the Thames yet. He winks. We drink too much down here for it to settle. You don't correct him. London's rhythm hasn't stopped. It's only changed key. The taverns are still full, quieter but full. The guild halls still open, though fewer voices argue within. The markets bustle, albeit with more vinegar and fewer children. The churches ring their bells with a nervous energy, as if trying to keep death distracted. The city knows what's coming. It just hasn't figured out how to scream yet. You spend your days walking, watching, counting how many carriages pass, how many rats cross a street, how many people touch their faces. At St. Paul's, you hear a sermon about humility. The preacher talks about Job. He doesn't mention the hundreds buried behind the chapel. Historians will later argue how prepared London truly was. Some say the city had protocols, quarantines, watchmen, burial orders. Others argue it was too crowded, too arrogant, too stubborn to contain anything more dangerous than gossip. But no matter how advanced the parchment or how stern the decree, nothing could stop what was already in the lungs of the milkmaid, the merchant, the priest. The symptoms appear quietly at first. A cough here, a swelling there, but the panic erupts overnight. One morning, you wake to the sound of church bells everywhere, all at once. Southwark is sealed off. A man hangs a sign on the tavern, "Plague within." You don't ask who, you already know. The rich flee north, abandoning their townhouses and mistresses. The poor, left behind, turn to prayer, theft, or silence. You see a man sell his daughter's necklace for a loaf of bread. The baker gives him half. He smiles anyway. The graveyards fill so quickly that mass pits are dug in every borough. Gravediggers wear hoods soaked in pitch. Priests perform blessings with long sticks. No one sings hymns anymore, just lullabies and sobs. You volunteer to help, not because you want to be noble, but because doing something feels better than waiting. You carry bodies to carts. You shovel dirt. You learn not to look at faces, especially not the children. One night you meet a girl named Clara. She's 10. Her parents are both dead. She wears her mother's apron and her father's shoes. She insists she's fine. She's not. You let her sleep in your room, and she takes the bed without asking. You don't mind. You sleep on the floor, listening to her breathe. In the morning, she's cold. You bury her yourself. You don't cry, not then. But later, in the corner of a ruined chapel, you scream until your throat bleeds. And no one tells you to stop, because they're screaming too. As the days pass, London fractures, whole streets are boarded shut, lanterns glow red in windows marked with painted crosses. God have mercy, they say. He doesn't answer. The doctors, those infamous plague doctors, with their beaked masks and stiff robes, become common sights. Children run from them. Dogs bark. You watch one try to administer herbs to a man who has no face left. You leave Southwark when the rats start crawling over your feet at night. You move to an abandoned house in Shoreditch, where a widow used to brew ale in her cellar. The cellar now holds only dust and regret. At night, you hear singing in the streets, not joyful, but desperate. Psalms mixed with folk songs, prayers tangled with curses. One voice chants over and over, "Wash your sins, wash your hands." It's oddly catchy. You find a journal under a floorboard. The last entry reads, "If the Lord is testing us, I fear we've already failed." You add a new line, or maybe the test was never ours. And still, the city burns. Not literally, not yet, but spiritually, emotionally, eternally. The fire will come later, in 1666. But this is the spark, the moment London realizes it's mortal, that its walls can crumble, its kings can flee, its people can fall. You stay until the smell becomes unbearable, until the bells stop ringing, until even the Thames seems to weep. Then, one morning, you saddle maybe and ride out. Not because the plague is gone, but because you're still alive, and the road still calls. You ride out of London with a heavy heart and a heavier silence. The city doesn't watch you go. It's too busy dying. The road ahead coils westward through the misty shires and rolling hills of a countryside that thinks it's still safe. The trees stand tall. The rivers babble. The cottages puff smoke like everything's fine. It's almost rude. Maybe carries you past hedgerows blooming in oblivious splendour, her hooves muffled by layers of wet leaves. England is green again, but now green feels like an insult, like hope worn too openly. You pass a flock of sheep in a field. The shepherd lies nearby, very still, his crook tangled in his arms. The sheep pay him no mind. You head toward Oxford, not because you expect safety, but because if any place thinks it can reason with death, it's a university town. Books, after all, have always been mistaken for shields, and Oxford, proud and preening, believes its Latin can protect it better than any wall. The city rises like a scholar caught in the act of prayer, half bent, eyes red from reading, mouth open mid-theory. You cross Magdalen Bridge and enter through East Gate, past a wooden cross draped in withering lilies. A young man watches you from beneath a balcony. He's pale, sniffling, scribbling on parchment as he mutters aloud, "Plague, airborne, or divine retribution. Discuss." Inside, Oxford is alive in the way a beehive is alive, before smoke is applied. Students still walk in small groups, heads bowed over books, arguing about Aquinas and Aristotle with the desperation of people clinging to ideas like life rafts. Professors lecture behind cloth veils. Priors burn incense in the hallways of Balliol. The library smells like dust, ink, and denial. You find a room at a scholar's lodging house near the Radcliffe area. Your host, Master Llewellyn, teaches logic. He greets you with a forced smile and a bottle of elderberry wine. "To reason," he says. You clink glasses. It tastes like fermented stubbornness. You spend your first evening attending a debate in a stone courtyard lit by candlelight. The topic whether the plague may be considered a punishment or a purification. One side argues hell has leaked into the world. The other insists this is merely the earth correcting itself, like a dog shaking off fleas. Neither side convinces the pigeons roosting above or the coughing scribe in the third row. Historians argue that Oxford saw both resistance and retreat. Some colleges closed early, sending students home to die in more familiar surroundings. Others doubled down, turning inward, building theories faster than funerals. Some professors vanished, others wrote volumes. The university didn't stop, because nothing at Oxford ever really stops. It just pauses, rewrites its thesis, and resumes with more footnotes. You spend days helping Master Llewellyn copy texts, not because the work matters, but because it's something to do with your hands besides shaking. He mutters while he writes, quoting Galen, Aristotle, and occasionally his own previous lectures. The body is a system, he says, like a city. One corruption, and the walls fall. You nod. You've seen too many cities fall to disagree. In the evenings you walk the gardens of Christ Church Meadow, where deer still graze and students still pretend not to notice the funerals, just outside the walls. You meet a young woman named Eleanor, who studies astronomy. She points at the stars and says, "Maybe we were always meant to burn." You ask if she's afraid. She shrugs. "We're stardust anyway. Might as well go out glittering." One night, you and Eleanor sneak into the Bodleian. The guard is asleep. The shelves stretch like frozen cathedrals, filled with wisdom that can't save anyone. She reads you a poem in Latin. You pretend to understand. Then you kiss, not because of love, but because she's warm, and you're tired, and the world outside keeps dying. You wake alone. She leaves a note. Don't wait for me. The stars already know. You never see her again. The city begins to crack. It starts with a cook at the college kitchen, coughing, then collapsing, then a librarian, then a professor in mid-lecture who dies with the word inevitably still on his tongue. The university tries to quarantine. They post signs. They assign clean zones. Students flee in droves. So do rats. You find Master Llewellyn in his study, staring at an open book. His hands tremble. He's written erat demonstrandum 27 times. He doesn't recognize you. You bury him in the garden, under the laurel tree. You don't say a prayer. You don't need to. The tree says it for you. You pack your things. Oxford, once filled with questions, now has only answers no one wants. You ride west again, toward Wales, toward mountains and myths. The flatlands behind you vanish into mist. The roads narrow, then twist, then vanish altogether. You follow the sound of water, of wind, of something older than plague or parchment. At a crossroads, you meet a blind woman who offers you a piece of coal. To ward off spirits, she says. You take it. You leave her a coin. She blesses you in Welsh, a language that sounds like the sea, remembering something. That night, you sleep beside a stream. Maybe drinks quietly. The stars pulse like veins in the sky. You think of Eleanor, of Llewellyn, of Clara, of everyone and no one. You wonder if the plague is the end of something, or just the beginning. And then you sleep, because dreams are the only place that death hasn't claimed yet. The Welsh hills rise before you, like waves in stone, green crests hardened by centuries, each one older than every kingdom you've passed through. You enter Cymru, not as a conqueror nor a pilgrim, but as something in between, a refugee wrapped in silence and saddle sweat, chasing rumours of places the plague has not yet touched. The road west is more like a suggestion. Grass has overgrown the path, and stone markers lie face down in moss, as if the earth is tired of giving directions. Maybe handles the terrain well, her hooves sure, her pace steady. She doesn't ask questions. She doesn't complain. You envy her clarity. You pass through a village called Gwalm Selen, which means Valley of Holly. The name feels festive, almost sarcastic, considering the boarded windows and quiet graveyard. A boy watches you from a rooftop, holding a wooden sword. He salutes you solemnly. You return it. There's still a kingdom somewhere in his head. You hope it stays there. People here speak Welsh more than English, and when they do speak to you, it's with the cadence of wind in hollow places. Words like Angal, death, and Tang Nefed slip into their sentences like prayers with splinters. They don't ask why you've come, they already know. Everyone is running from something. You stay a few nights in a sheep farmer's barn, tucked into the Brecon beacons. He offers you bread and onion stew in exchange for chopping wood and not asking about the extra grave in his garden. You agree. No one speaks of their dead anymore. It's considered rude. The wind in the hills carries stories of villages untouched, valleys so remote. Even the rats haven't bothered. Of druids performing blessings in oak groves, of wells with healing waters. You follow these whispers, not because you believe them, but because belief itself has become a form of travel, movement, direction. You reach Langorse Lake, where a woman in a boat sells holy stones wrapped in nettle leaves. She tells you she once saw a man walk across the water. You ask what happened to him. She says he came back wet. Then she laughs until she coughs. You buy a stone. It's warm in your hand. You keep it. The plague has not yet arrived here, or so it seems. There are no red crosses, no black banners, no cries echoing through the valleys. But the people act like it's already here. They wear herbs around their necks, burn peat laced with sage, and refuse to shake hands. Every stranger is suspect. Every cough a potential omen. You visit a monastery on a cliffside overlooking the sea. The monks live in silence, broken only by chants so low they vibrate in your ribs. You are allowed to stay one night. The walls are thick, the wind howls like an exorcism. You share a meal of barley bread and fish, then lie on a stone floor beneath a wooden carving of St. David. In the dark, you wonder, what if the silence is worse than the sickness? What if isolation doesn't save you, just stretches the waiting? You dream of London, of Clara, of Eleanor, of hands reaching for you from under closed doors. You wake with your heart racing, your mouth dry, your fingers clutching the holy stone like it's a lifeline. You leave before dawn. In the town of Marshalleth, you hear the first confirmed report. The plague has reached Shrewsbury, just over the border. A merchant tells you in a hushed voice, like he's confessing sin. They buried 12 yesterday, he says, then 20 more this morning. He doesn't finish the thought. You don't turn back. You don't need to. The wind has already shifted. You can feel it in the way the trees lean, the way animals avoid the road. You begin to count your own breaths, monitoring them like a miser watches coins. Further west, near the coastal cliffs, you meet an old healer named Anwen. She invites you into her hut, filled with jars of moss, dried flowers, and animal bones. She reads your hands, then your eyes. You've carried death, she says, but you're not married to it. You ask what that means. She says, you still ask questions. You spend 3 nights with her. She teaches you how to brew a tea from foxglove and honey. You listen to her sing to the sea. On the last night, she hands you a small pouch filled with crushed fern, salt, and something that smells like thunder. For protection, she says, or seasoning. You leave with the pouch tied to your belt. By now your dreams are thick with symbols, doors that never open, faces without mouths, a horse that speaks your name. You begin to suspect that sleep is no longer rest, it's negotiation. You reach the westernmost cliffs near Aberdoran, where the land ends not with a whimper, but with a hymn. The wind is fierce, and the sea below snarls like it's chewing bones. You stand at the edge, staring out toward Ireland, wondering if it too is doomed, wondering if maybe, just maybe, this is as far as it goes. But you know better. You've followed the pattern across kingdoms, rivers, and hearts. The plague doesn't respect borders. It doesn't stop for oceans. It arrives with the tide. That night, the stars flicker like candles held too close to breath. And the next morning you hear it, coughing from the valley below. It's here. It always was. You turn from the sea, not to run, but to ride, because the road is long, and you are still breathing. The news travels faster than the plague itself now. Rumours born on every breeze, whispered behind closed doors, passed from trembling lips in markets and monasteries alike. Ireland, once thought a refuge, now braces beneath the shadow of the Black Death. You find yourself ferrying across the churning sea, the waters grey and restless, as if mourning what's to come. The boat rocks with every wave, and beneath your feet the wooden planks creak like old bones. You clutch your bundle tighter, the pouch from Unwen swinging at your side, a small talisman against the creeping dread. The coastline of Ireland looms, jagged cliffs, green fields, patchworked by stone fences, and villages where smoke curls in hesitant plumes. You disembark at a small harbour in Wexford, a town known for its fishermen and stubborn spirit. The air here feels different, less acrid, more earthy, but you can't shake the sense of an unseen weight pressing down. The villagers greet you with wary eyes, their smiles thin and fragile like the early morning fog. You spend days moving cautiously through the countryside. The villages are scattered, small and isolated, but none are untouched. There are signs, closed doors with crosses painted in charcoal, hastily dug graves outside churchyards, and quiet streets where laughter has long since fled. You visit a market where a woman sells herbs and charms, her fingers stained with the sap of hawthorn and the ash of burned sage. She warns you to keep your talisman close, whispering that the plague is not just sickness, but a spirit that walks among the living. The Irish countryside is a patchwork of beauty and sorrow. Rolling hills dotted with sheep, ancient standing stones that have witnessed centuries of human folly, and rivers that sparkle like silver snakes under the low sun. But beneath this pastoral calm lies a landscape being slowly hollowed out, one village at a time. Fields lie fallow as farmers succumb, churches close their doors, and the once vibrant Gaelic songs are replaced by silent prayers. You take refuge in a monastery perched on the cliffs near Clonmacnoise, where monks chant in haunting melodies that echo against stone walls. They welcome you with cautious hospitality, offering bread baked with herbs and wine watered down with holy water. The abbey is a sanctuary of fragile hope, a place where the plague's shadow seems held at bay by faith and fortitude. But even here the toll is visible. Empty cells, silent corridors, and a graveyard growing too quickly for comfort. One monk, Brother Kieran, shares his story with you. He speaks of the plague as a test, a divine reckoning that will purify the soul of Ireland. His eyes gleam with a mixture of despair and determination as he recounts the loss of his family, the fall of nearby villages, and the relentless advance of death. He tells you that even the saints seem silent in these times, and that only the quiet endurance of the faithful keeps the world from unraveling completely. You listen, feeling the weight of his words settle deep within you. Outside, the wind howls like a dirge, carrying the scent of rain and decay. You wonder how long such quiet courage can withstand the relentless march of the plague. As days turn into weeks, you venture further into the heart of Ireland. You cross bogs where the ground seems to breathe beneath your feet, and forests where the trees whisper ancient secrets. The people you meet are hardy and kind, but marked by sorrow. A farmer named Seamus offers you a place to rest, sharing stories of his children taken too soon and the resilience of those left behind. He shows you the scars on his hands from endless labor, and the determination in his eyes that refuses to be extinguished. You think of your own journey, the faces and places left behind, the endless road stretching before you. The plague has changed everything, yet life persists in the most stubborn of ways. You find yourself reflecting on the fragile balance between despair and hope, death and survival. One night, under a sky ablaze with stars, you sit by a fire with Seamus and a small group of villagers. They sing songs of old heroes and lost loves, their voices rising in defiant harmony against the darkness. You join in, your voice raw but resolute, a small act of rebellion against the silence the plague demands. In the weeks that follow, the plague continues its slow, merciless spread. You witness acts of kindness and cruelty, faith and fear, endurance and surrender. You see how communities fracture and reform, how traditions adapt in the face of unimaginable loss, and how the human spirit, though battered, refuses to be broken. As you prepare to leave Ireland behind, you carry with you the stories, the songs, and the scars of a land caught between past and present, life and death. You know that your journey is far from over, that the plague will continue to shape the world in ways both terrible and profound. And so you mount, maybe, once more, feeling the weight of the road ahead and the flicker of something stubborn and bright within your chest. You ride toward the horizon, ready to face whatever comes next, knowing that survival is as much about the stories we carry as the breaths we take. You step onto the shores of Scotland as the chill of the northern wind bites through your cloak, carrying with it the scent of peat fires and pine. The land feels ancient here, wrapped in myths and mist, a place where the earth itself seems to hold its breath. You wonder if the plague respects such wildness, or if it too can dance with the ghosts of the highlands. Travelling through the rugged terrain, you notice how the villages cling to the valleys like stubborn lichens, isolated and self-contained. Here the plague arrives not as a roaring tide, but as a creeping fog, slow and insidious. People speak in Gaelic whispers, their words heavy with reverence and fear. The healers, known as wise women, or bone setters, work by candlelight, their hands guided by tradition and desperation. You find shelter in a small hamlet nestled among the rolling hills near Loch Lomond. The villagers are wary but hospitable, offering you a place beside their hearth and a share of oatcakes and ale. They tell tales of the Black Death's advance, of families lost and kinship tested. You learn that here, as everywhere, the old ways mingle with new fears, herbs hung in doorways, prayers whispered to saints long forgotten, and fires burned to cleanse the unseen. One elder, a stooped man named Fergus, shares stories of past plagues and the resilience of the Scots. His eyes gleam with both sorrow and stubborn hope as he recounts how his ancestors faced similar darkness and survived through community and courage. He offers you a charm made of rowan berries and iron, said to ward off evil spirits. You accept, feeling the weight of tradition settle around you like a shield. The plague's toll is evident in every corner, the abandoned crofts, the fields left untilled, the graves freshly dug beside ancient cairns. Yet amid the loss, life persists. Children play cautiously in the distance, and songs rise from the hearths at night, blending sorrow with defiance. You ride north toward Edinburgh, passing castles perched like sentinels on craggy hills and monasteries where monks continue their silent prayers. The city greets you with a mixture of bustle and dread. Markets operate under the watchful eyes of guards, and the city's leaders implement strict measures, quarantines, watch patrols, and public prayers. Still the plague weaves through the streets like a shadow no candle can banish. You witness scenes both heartbreaking and hauntingly beautiful. Families gathered around sick beds, neighbours sharing what little they have, and moments of quiet dignity amid despair. A young woman named Moira offers you shelter in her modest home, sharing stories of loss and survival. Her strength and kindness remind you that even in the darkest times, humanity flickers like a candle flame, fragile but unyielding. As winter approaches, the cold sets in, biting through the stones and into the marrow. The plague slows but does not relent. You find yourself reflecting on the journey, on the cities and villages, the faces and stories that have marked your path. Scotland's rugged beauty and fierce spirit leave an indelible mark on your soul. One evening, as you sit by a fire with Moira and a handful of villagers, you hear the distant howl of wolves and the steady beat of the rain on the roof. The firelight dances on their faces, casting shadows that flicker like ghosts. They speak of hope, of renewal, of the land healing after the storm. You realize that the story of the Black Death is not just one of death, but of endurance and transformation. You prepare to leave Scotland behind, carrying with you the memories and lessons of a land both scarred and resilient. The road ahead is long, and the world forever changed, but you ride forward with a heart tempered by loss and hope. Because in the end, survival is not just about escaping death, but about living with the shadows it leaves behind. You cross into the Low Countries, a patchwork of waterways and winding canals that shimmer under a pale sky. The flat landscape feels strangely exposed after the rugged hills of Scotland, like a thin sheet stretched tight over a secret. You hear whispers that the plague arrived here not on foot but by boat, slipping silently through ports like a thief in the night. The towns are quaint but tense. Bruges, Ghent, Antwerp, names that once conjured images of prosperity and bustling trade, now feel haunted. The markets still buzz with merchants shouting over the clatter of hooves and carts, but the faces are drawn tight, eyes darting. Masks made of linen and herbs become common sights, an early attempt at protection born of fear and desperation. You wander through narrow streets slick with rain, passing churches where candles burn low, and priests wear gaunt expressions. The citizens clutch rosaries, mumble prayers, and avoid close contact. Rumours swirl of strange customs, quarantine houses, where the sick are left to their fate, charnel pits dug hastily outside city walls, and processions of flagellants whipping themselves through the streets in penance. The plague's presence is felt in every shadow and whispered conversation. Yet, amid the fear, life finds ways to persist. You witness acts of generosity, neighbours sharing food, strangers tending the ill, and moments of quiet beauty, like a child releasing a dove into the grey sky. You find refuge in a merchant's house in Bruges. His name is Peter, a man who has seen too many faces disappear, and speaks softly of hope and endurance. He offers you bread and ale, sharing stories of how the city is grappling with the crisis. The canals are kept clear of bodies, the guilds organise aid, and the city council debates measures to contain the spread. Yet the invisible enemy moves relentlessly onward. Historians argue over the extent of the plague's devastation here. Some claim the death toll was lower due to strict quarantines and early public health measures. Others point to overcrowding and poverty as amplifiers of tragedy. What's clear is that the Black Death left scars both visible and unseen on the landscape, the economy, and the collective psyche. You journey to Antwerp, a city rising in prominence as a trade hub, its docks bustling with goods from distant lands. But the shadows are longer here, the fear more palpable. You see ships arriving with crews too weak to unload their cargo, markets emptying, and streets growing quieter by the day. A local apothecary shares with you his mixtures of herbs and potions, admitting they do little more than ease symptoms. He speaks of a hope pinned on knowledge yet to come, a future where disease might be understood and conquered. You nod, grateful for his candour. You travel through countryside dotted with windmills and farms, where villagers maintain ancient traditions even as the plague threatens to upend their world. You witness funeral pyres flickering against twilight, communities locked down, and the resilience of people clinging to faith and each other. As you prepare to leave the Low Countries, you reflect on the paradox of this place, commerce and contagion intertwined, beauty and decay dancing side by side. The plague has rewritten the map of Europe, but humanity's spirit writes its own stubborn annotations. You mount Maybe and set your gaze eastward toward lands where the plague first stirred and where your journey began. The circle feels complete, but the road stretches ever onward, because stories like this don't end, they echo, and you, weary traveller, carry the echoes forward. You turn your gaze back toward the east, tracing the ancient Silk Road in your mind, the route where the Black Death first slipped from shadow into history. The lands you once crossed as whispers now loom large, vast and complex. You journey through the fractured realms of the Mongol successor states, where cities rise and fall like the tides, and the desert wind carries tales both cruel and captivating. Here, in these steppes and oases, the plague was born, carried by rodents and riders alike. You imagine the caravans, laden with silk and spices, unknowingly harbouring death in the folds of their sails. The great city of Kaffa, now a haunting memory, had been ground zero, where siege and sickness mingled in a grim dance. You pass through the dusty remnants of once glorious trading hubs, their markets silent except for the occasional call of a lone hawk. The people here speak in tongues you barely recognize, their faces weathered by sun and sorrow. Stories persist, tales of catapults, hurling plague-ridden corpses into besieged cities, a gruesome weaponization that was less science and more desperation. You shudder, imagining the stench and the fear. The landscape shifts from arid steppe to fertile river valleys, where farmers tend to crops that may feed the living or rot under the same sun that scorches their skin. You meet a shepherd who speaks of a death wind that withers flocks and families alike. His eyes hold a sadness ancient and deep. Historians still argue about the exact origin of the Black Death. Some place it in the high deserts of Central Asia, others in the lush banks of Lake Issyk-Kul. What they agree on is the role of the Mongol Empire in facilitating the spread, unifying vast territories, and creating unprecedented trade networks that, for all their glory, also became highways for plague. You visit a small settlement along the Volga River, where remnants of the Golden Horde's influence linger in the stories told by elders. They speak of Tartars and Mongols, of wars and peace, and of a time when the world felt both connected and perilously fragile. You share bread with a woman who claims her ancestors fled the first wave, only to be chased by the second. The plague's journey eastward was not one of sudden catastrophe, but of slow, creeping ruin, washing over villages and cities in waves. You see evidence of that here, in empty fields, crumbling walls, and the quiet desperation of people trying to live beneath the shadow of inevitability. You spend nights beneath the vast sky, where stars glitter with indifferent brilliance. The constellations look the same as when you first began this journey, but everything else has changed. You feel the weight of history pressing down, the echoes of millions who came before. In a small yurt, you meet a healer who combines ancient herbal wisdom with emerging ideas about illness and contagion. She speaks softly of balance between body and spirit, earth and sky, life and death. You listen, realizing that understanding the plague requires more than science. It requires empathy, humility, and perhaps a touch of hope. As you prepare to leave this land where the Black Death first unfurled its terrible wings, you reflect on the interconnectedness of all things, the roads, the rivers, the people, and the stories. The plague was not merely a disease, it was a reckoning, a reminder of humanity's fragile place in the vast tapestry of existence. You mount, maybe once more, feeling the cool wind at your back and the endless horizon ahead. Your journey has come full circle, but the world is forever altered. The Black Death has passed, but its shadow lingers in memory, in culture, and in the very fabric of human history. You ride on, carrying the stories of loss and resilience, the whispers of forgotten places, and the quiet hope that even in the darkest times life endures, because that is the true story the plague tells. As you leave the familiar steps behind, you find yourself retracing the final grim steps of the plague's passage through Eastern Europe, lands of dense forests, winding rivers, and villages nestled in shadows. The air here carries a chill that seeps into your bones, as if the cold is not just from the weather, but from memories of loss long etched into the soil. You journey through Poland, where cities like Krakow and Warsaw show signs of tentative recovery mingled with fresh scars. Here, the plague had arrived later than in the West, but no less ruthlessly. The countryside bears the marks of abandoned farms and silent churches, while the people are cautious, holding tightly to rituals and superstitions meant to keep death at bay. In a small village near the Carpathians, you meet a group of villagers gathered around a fire, sharing tales of survival and sorrow. They speak of how the plague came in waves, each one more devastating than the last, leaving behind not only empty homes but fractured communities. You learn about the wooden crosses that mark mass graves, the songs sung to soothe the dying, and the bitter hope that the worst might be over. You stay with an elderly woman named Katarzyna, who tends a garden of herbs and wild flowers. She teaches you about the healing properties of plants. Yarrow for wounds, elderberry for fevers, and sage for restless spirits. Her hands are steady, but her eyes carry the weight of centuries of grief. She tells you that healing is as much about faith as it is about medicine, a delicate balance between body and soul. The forests surrounding the village are thick and ancient, filled with whispers and shadows. You walk among towering pines and listen to the wind weaving through the branches, carrying stories from distant lands. In the stillness, you feel the pulse of life continuing beneath the surface, stubborn and unyielding. As you move eastward, you encounter towns rebuilding from ruin, markets reopening, schools resuming lessons, and churches ringing bells once more. The resilience of these communities is palpable, a testament to the human spirit's refusal to be extinguished. Yet beneath the surface, fear lingers like a shadow, a reminder that the plague's grip was not easily broken. Historians debate the long-term impact of the Black Death on Eastern Europe. Some argue that it accelerated social and economic changes, weakening feudal structures and opening paths for new ideas. Others emphasize the deep trauma and disruption it caused, effects felt for generations. What remains clear is that the plague reshaped the continent in profound and lasting ways. You find moments of beauty amid the devastation, a child's laughter echoing in a rebuilt courtyard, a harvest festival glowing with candlelight, the quiet dedication of healers tending to the sick. These glimpses of life renew your hope and remind you why the journey matters. One evening, as you rest by a riverbank, you watch the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson. The water reflects the colors like a mirror, and you think of all the lives lost, all the stories shared, and all the paths still ahead. You understand that the Black Death is not just a tale of death, but of endurance, transformation, and the unyielding will to live. You mount, maybe, for the final leg of your journey, carrying with you the voices of those you've met, their grief, their courage, and their dreams. The road stretches before you, winding toward a future forever shaped by the shadows of the past. And as you ride, you know that history is not just about what happened, but about how we remember, tell, and learn from the stories we carry. Because the Black Death's story is still alive in every breath, every heartbeat, and every step forward. The journey leads you finally back to the heart of Europe, to the very cities where the Black Death's grip first tightened and then began to loosen. The world you return to is both familiar and strange. Streets once choked with the cries of the dying now hum with cautious life, buildings scarred but standing, and faces marked by sorrow but striving toward hope. This is the fragile dawn after the long dark night. You walk through the ruins of cities like Florence and Venice, where art and commerce had once flourished before the plague's shadow fell. In Florence you find streets bustling again, but the laughter sounds brittle, like glass trembling on the edge of breaking. The Medici palaces stand silent sentinels over a city forever changed. Artists paint not only beauty, but also death, capturing the macabre dance that the plague choreographed. Venice feels more haunted. The canals still shimmer under moonlight, but the gondolas glide past empty squares and boarded-up shops. The plague doctor's masks, once symbols of dread, have become relics themselves, reminders of a time when humanity faced an invisible enemy with little more than hope and superstition. You watch the city's inhabitants light candles along the canals, as if their flickering flames can push back the darkness. Here, historians debate whether the Black Death ultimately led to the Renaissance, a flowering of creativity born from tragedy and loss, or if it simply delayed the inevitable decay of an empire already faltering. You think perhaps both are true, intertwined like the city's labyrinthine waterways. In the small villages surrounding these great cities, you meet survivors whose stories ripple with resilience and heartbreak. A blacksmith who lost his family but found purpose in rebuilding, a midwife who delivered life even as death marched beside her, a merchant who, despite the odds, reopened his shop with fresh goods and weary hope. You listen to their tales, realizing that the plague did more than decimate populations. It reshaped social orders, questioned old beliefs, and ignited new ways of thinking. Serfs gained bargaining power. Women stepped into roles once denied. The rigid hierarchies trembled under the weight of so many lost lives. One evening, you attend a small gathering where scholars discuss the future. They speak cautiously of science and observation, of learning from the plague's devastation to better guard against what may come. You think back to the plague doctors, their masks and robes, their brave but often futile efforts, and wonder how much has changed and how much remains the same. As you prepare to leave these places behind, you carry with you a profound sense of transformation, not only in the world, but in yourself. The journey has been long, marked by grief and revelation. You have seen death's cruel face, but also life's stubborn glow. You mount maybe one last time, feeling the weight of centuries in your bones and the whisper of stories yet to be told. The road stretches forward, endless and open, a reminder that history is a living thing, always moving, always changing, and always teaching. Because the story of the Black Death is not just a tale of death, but a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The road now leads you toward the final chapter of this dark odyssey, toward the world that rose, trembling but unbroken from the ashes of the Black Death. You ride through landscapes still scarred by loss, where the earth itself seems to whisper the names of those who did not return. Fields once tilled lie fallow, villages rebuilt on bones, and cities humming with the uneasy energy of rebirth. You enter the emerging towns of the late 14th century, where life is both fragile and fierce. Markets bustle with merchants trading goods that have travelled continents, now with a new urgency, spices, cloth, metals and ideas. The scars of plague have reshaped economies. Labour is scarce, wages rise, and old hierarchies tremble. Peasants find new opportunities. Women step into roles unimagined before, and the balance of power shifts in subtle but profound ways. You visit a bustling fair, where a storyteller weaves tales of the past, the great mortality, the angels of death, and the heroes who fought invisible enemies. Children listen wide-eyed, adults nod somberly, and the air hums with memory and meaning. You feel the weight of history settling into narrative, the stories passed down to remind, warn, and inspire. In the cities, art flourishes like never before. Painters capture the dance of death. Musicians compose melodies that echo loss and hope, and writers pen works that question faith and fate. The plague's shadow lingers, but so does the spark of creativity, a testament to humanity's refusal to be defined by suffering alone. You walk through churches, where new prayers mingle with old, where tombstones bear witness to lives ended and lives begun anew. The clergy grapple with faith shaken by catastrophe, sparking debates and reforms that will ripple through the centuries. You meet a monk who speaks cautiously of renewal, of a world reborn through trial and tribulation. Historians still debate the full impact of the Black Death, the demographic shifts, the social upheavals, the cultural transformations. Some see it as a brutal punctuation mark in history, others as a painful but necessary chapter in humanity's story. You think it was both terrible and transformative, a wound and a catalyst. As you prepare to conclude your journey, you reflect on the threads that weave this story together, the fear and faith, the cruelty and compassion, the endings and beginnings. The Black Death was not just a plague, it was a mirror held up to humanity, revealing both its fragility and its strength. You mount, maybe, for the final time, the road stretching out before you like an unfinished tale. You carry with you the voices of millions, the lost, the survivors, the forgotten. Their stories are now part of you, etched into your journey, whispered in the wind. You ride forward into the future, knowing that history is never truly over. It lives in every breath, every heartbeat, every story told in the quiet hours before sleep. And so, as the night deepens and the world falls silent, you close your eyes, carrying the weight and wonder of a world forever changed. Because the story of the Black Death is not just a tale of survival, it's the story of life itself. The fire has dimmed. The last whispers of the past now settle softly in the quiet. You have journeyed through cities and fields, through fear and hope, through despair and resilience. The Black Death was a reckoning, a great unravelling that revealed the raw edges of humanity. But it also was a beginning, a new dawn, where old orders faltered and new ideas took root, where suffering shaped art, faith and science, where the threads of connection stretched wider, binding a world still learning how to heal. Now, as your breathing slows and the night cradles you in its gentle embrace. Remember, history is not only in the books or the bones. It lives in the soft rhythms of the heart, in the quiet stories whispered between shadows. So rest now. Let the echoes of the past fade into dreams, and awaken anew, because life, fragile and fierce, always goes on.